Welcome to the Pen to Publish podcast with your hosts, Alexa Whitten, author, typesetter and independent publisher, and
Alexa Tewkesbury, author, editor and proofreader.
Hi, and welcome to episode 8 of the Pen to Publish podcast. And today it is an author interview, which we're going to be doing at the end of each series. And we have Kylie Dixon, who is author of Inkcap and the Nethers. She's also writing a sequel to this book, and she's also done a fantastic colouring book called Mushroom Mindfulness, which is an array of all sorts of lovely mushroom-inspired images that you can colour in, and it also includes some of her characters from the Inkcap and the Nethers book. So Alexa 1 is going to be asking most of these questions, but we're going to just get to know Kylie a little bit, where she's from, how she's found the whole process, what she's working on, and also to get a real insider feel of how from not being a published author to now being one. Alexa 1, would you like to kick off with your fantastic questions that you've got for Kylie?
Well, Kylie Dixon, as I said last week, you are this incredible ball of energy. And whenever I see you doing one of your lives or just read your posts, there's just this incredible enthusiasm for everything that you do that comes through. So it must be to do with mushrooms. The first thing I wanted just to ask was, so there we were in lockdown of spring 2020. What made you suddenly think, I know, I'll write a children's book featuring mushrooms?
Probably have to go back a little bit, Alexa, and can I just say hello, ladies, and thank you so much for having us on your podcast. And I think it's incredible how you're still calling each other Alexa 1 and Alexa 2. I just think that's amazing, because I thought that I'd made it up, but clearly it's not. It's something that you refer to yourselves as. So I'm going to go back a little bit, because it all started with, I was working in a bank for 18 years in the corporate world. I became an artist because I was put in a redundancy situation. So I decided to go with my passion and become an artist. I knew that I wanted to do a certain type of art. So I do lots of art that's inspired by process. It's called alcohol ink work. I love the bright colours. Everything that I'm about is about bright fun. Now, I knew at the beginning that I wanted something really unique. I didn't know what it was, and I was walking through the forest close to where I live. So I live in a little town called Seaham in the northeast of England in County Durham, and we have lots of forests and deans. And at the time I was walking through, I looked down at my feet, and there I found an abundance of mushrooms, right, all around, like so many mushrooms. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen that many mushrooms in the wild. It was then that I thought, all right, I'm going to Google this. But when I was researching it, I actually found out that spotting mushrooms in the wild is a symbol of positivity and hope. And that was kind of my sign. And I totally believe in fate and symbols and signs. And I just thought, that's it. So everything that I created going forward had a little mushroom illustration in absolutely everything that I designed. So you might be asking about, how on earth did this lead on to me writing a book? Because I can't quite believe it either. So at the time when lockdown hit, I went through a really challenging couple of weeks, to be honest, Alexa. I thought my business was going to fail. I was still quite early in the stage of my business, which I actually named Mushroom Marvellous. I'd been doing it for 8 months. I was starting to get quite a good following, lots of interest. And I just thought, art is more of a want than a need. It's not a service. It's something that people want. So I just thought my business was going to fail, and I had to learn how to pivot, and I had to learn very quickly how to switch everything online. And thought, right, I've got a skill, I've got a value. What can I actually do here? And I decided to set up a Facebook group called The Magical World of Mushroom Marvellous, where I go in and I inspire the people at home who were sat at home, you know, the day after day grind of homeschooling, not knowing what was going on in the world, loads of negativity, and they were at home with small children. And I was going in and giving them tutorials on how to do little challenges, colouring challenges, art challenges. And I started to talk to them about potentially writing a book. I'd never written a book before. I'd never even thought about writing a book, but I knew about this little secret world of mushroom characters that were starting to grow in my mind. Okay, stay with us here. And they were like, oh my God, you need to write a book. And we'll get into a bit more of the book in a bit, but they just totally inspired us to go, you know what? I'm going to attempt it. I was at home myself. I was kind of in a bit of a weird space in my mind, and I thought, this can take me away from feeling a little bit downhearted. And so I started to write a book, and that's where it all started.
I love that you saw these little mushrooms and they became a symbol of hope. I love that. With everything else that was going on, obviously, last year, when you sat down to write, was it something that came easily to you? Was it just when the mood took you that you sat down to write, or were you very methodical about it and you set aside a specific writing time each day?
Yeah, so I am somebody who really thrives on routine and structure. And I think when lockdown hit, routine just went out the window completely, didn't it? I mean, it was all over the place. You didn't really know what was happening. So it kind of impacted me quite a lot. So I get up and go to the gym. It's very much part of my energy that I get up very early and my day starts very early and I go to the gym. All of that was taken away from us. So writing a book gave me a little bit of structure back. And what I did is I set aside a time each week, and it was a day. I had a writing day every single week. And because I started to have such an invested audience, which I'll talk about again about my group, and the fact that people were starting to follow my writing journey and I was sharing little snippets of the plot, that writing day really did feed into what I was actually doing on social media as well. So it became very much part of, this is something I've got to do each week, and it kept me focused.
I think that we were talking a lot in the series. We've talked about finding a particular writing slot and finding your time. And I suppose for a lot of people, suddenly having all that rest of their life taken away from them, it actually opened up some time for writing that they might not have had, before, with their normal day-to-day stuff and going out and doing things. So when you sat down to write on your writing day, did you, before you launched into your actual book, did you make a plan? Did you have just a vague outline in your head? Or was it, as you wrote, was it just something that sort of grew organically as you sat down to write?
I think it was a bit of both, to be honest, Alexa. Like, I've always been inspired by really magical books. I try to think about books that I completely fell in love with when I was a child. I was always sat with a book reading. I would read reams and reams and reams of different types of books. And I thought about the target audience. Now, these are all things I'd never even thought about. And then I was like, right, how do I even begin to write in a way that is correct for my audience? Now, I knew that I wanted to shout to the age group that I was when I really fell in love with books, which was like 7 to 10-year-olds. And I thought back to things like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I think I've read it to death about 50 million times. The Worst Witch series was very, very important. And that's because of how it was written, the length that it was, the style that it was in. And by looking at those types of books, I then mapped out a really rough guide. So I know you mentioned there about a plot or, did you write a structure? Yeah. And I did have to research this. I didn't know any of this. I thought about what are the key elements that are involved in a book for 7 to 10-year-olds. And I also spoke to my son, who was like 11 at the time, but he'd just come out of that age group as well. And we talked about how it had to have friendship in, lots of fun elements, the family side of it, have an end goal, and also like a bit of mystery and magic about it. And then I wrote a very, very basic plot. I think it's important to have a plot or some kind of a guide that you can keep referring to so you're not going off on a tangent. And then it just developed from there.
And your characters, the characters are so gorgeous and they're so kind of well defined, just in the way they talk, and you're very consistent with your characterization as well. And again, did you plan out your characters, or did you find that they evolved as you were telling the story?
I think they definitely evolved. My characters I just absolutely love. I am in love with the main character, who is Inkcap.
Me too.
I just love it. Well, everyone seems to like the other one who I'll talk about, who's Scales, who's another little character. But when I was talking about when I spotted the mushrooms in the wild, way back at the beginning of Mushroom Marvelous, lots of little weird signs seemed to happen. People started sending us photographs of certain mushrooms that they were spotting, and Inkcap mushroom kept coming up. I just saw it as a sign, and this is where Inkcap was inspired by. So Inkcap, he's the hero of the magical world of Mushroom Marvelous. It has a long cap, and their cap is full of ink. So that's where he was inspired by. And it wasn't until I started illustrating him, really trying to describe him, that I thought, how can he be developed into a character? And I started to think of the ink in his cap became his power, shall we say. So he has little ink capsules in his cap, which he fires through a blowpipe. He's very quick-witted. He's like the star of the show, shall we say. And then his little friend is Scales, is the complete opposite to Inkcap. He's more like a little bumbling, worried little mushroom, shall we say. He's inspired by a wood mushroom. This secret world of mush characters live in my dad's allotment. They do. They're there. I swear they're there. Just by spending time down there with my dad and my little boy and talking to my dad about different insects in there and different plants, the worm kept coming up, and I thought, I have to have a worm. I have to have a worm in there. So we have Wispin, who's like, he just completely developed from being a worm into the entire keeper of secrets of this magical world. And he's like such a wise old man. And it's like, it's just brilliant how they develop as you start talking about them.
And you have just so much enthusiasm and energy for your business and for your book. But when you were actually sitting down, so on your chosen writing days, did it always flow? Or were there some days that you thought, I don't even know why I started this? Because I get that when I'm writing. Were you like that? It's hard to imagine you being like that, because you say you're so full of enthusiasm.
Don't get us wrong, I definitely have days like that. And I think what's been very powerful about this whole experience is I share that as well with my audience. I tell them when I'm going through difficult times. So the only people I've really got other than my family and friends are this network of families who I can speak to. So the whole beginning process was such a learning curve. It was a constant challenge. So as I say, having that network of people on social media, being along the way, it was just so powerful. They are such a huge part of it. I don't think they realise how important they are. And I keep talking whenever I speak to people in the media or if I've been interviewed, I always focus on the fact that this all came from this community of people on social media. It's just amazing. So when I first started writing, I've never written a book before. And I think it's that whole questioning yourself. I was always questioning myself whether I could write. And it's a mental struggle, really, to sit down and physically type the words. Sometimes you're like, and especially when I've got no clue or ever experience of whether people are even going to like it. So yes, I've had really, really challenging days. But what I'd do, Alexa, is I'd use my family, my friends. I'd send snippets of what I was doing to people and going, can I write? And when they were coming back and saying, yeah, you can write, I was like, okay. Or then I'd illustrate in between, both like written and illustrated. But I'd get excited again. That would like remind us of why I was doing it in the first place. So yes, ups and downs all the way through. Definitely get writer's block. I know exactly what it is now. So
that's really, we did a whole episode on writer's block and tips, and that's a really interesting one, that you sent snippets of what you were writing to friends to get their feedback and get their encouragement. That's a really good idea to give you that motivation again. And actually I was going to ask this, but I think you've kind of answered it already, that because you mentioned writing the book online before you even started writing the book. And I suppose that kind of impetus, the fact that people were so enthusiastic about it, that must have also been an impetus to keep you going. Because I think it would have made me feel, well, I've got to do it now because I've said I'm going to.
What I didn't do the first time round is I didn't give myself a deadline. Now that might sound really strange, but I had no idea how long this was going to take us. So that was really useful for me. Community, all right, they love being part of something, especially children, especially families. I kind of brought them on this journey. I think that was the key to the success here. So yeah.
And you mentioned having illustrated as well, and your illustrations are beautiful and they're so characteristic of you somehow. Do you know what you enjoyed more, the writing or the illustrating, or was it because the writing was such a new thing to you? Perhaps it's hard to compare.
Oh, what do you think I'm going to answer? Come on.
Illustrating is your passion, so I would imagine that's probably going to be what it is, I would have thought.
Well, it actually flits from one to the other. I can't actually say which one is my favourite because it completely zones us out. It's interesting that you said the illustration was probably my favourite, but do you know how challenging illustration was? It was so difficult because illustration is completely different to artwork. It's like you have to really study how people pose. I did a lot of work and research by watching the illustrators of Disney movies, and it was so interesting.
And talking of illustrating and writing, you obviously knew at some stage it then all had to come together into a physical book. Were you daunted by the production side of things? Like, were you worried about how on earth you were going to get your writing and illustrating into an actual physical book?
Completely. I had zero clue, Alexa. Thought I'll think about that later, do you know what I mean? But as I got like a month in, a couple of chapters in, it was then I thought I need to really start getting the right people involved. So although it came out at Christmas last year, book one, it was quite early on when I tried to look for, a self-publisher. Was I going to go down the whole publishing route? I don't even know what's the opposite to self-publishing. Is it just publishing?
Traditional publishing.
Traditional. I did actually apply to a couple of agents, and it wasn't until I started networking with other business experts, like in my kind of circle of influence that I have on social media and in business. And then I found like the proofreader, your lovely two selves, your editor, designer. And it was just very important that I had the right people around us. I had no clue which direction I was going to go in. And I then thought, hang on a minute, why would I want to go and do the traditional publishing when I've done everything myself? It's so much more powerful, like you're doing it yourself. So I would say, biggest lesson, don't do it alone. Do not sit alone and think you're alone. Keep talking to family, friends, experts. It's so easy to get in your own head, and it can be quite crippling at times, and I've certainly been there. And you know what it is? I don't think I'd do anything different. I really wouldn't. The whole journey's been so exciting and so enjoyable. I just want to follow the whole process again.
Which you're going to do, because I know that you're already working on book 2. And Anna, are you finding that any easier now that you know a bit more what you're doing, what you know a bit more what to expect? I suppose in some ways it's easier because you've already got your team.
Yeah, so I am really excited for book 2. I can announce the title, which is Inkcap and the Blight of the Bonnets.
Ooh!
It is.
Exciting.
I know. And it is really exciting. And, I found that, yes, it's a little bit easier because I've gone through that whole journey, but things naturally develop. I just think it's really important to lean in when it's needed. And then, coming up to a launch, you have to massively lean into that. And that's something I will definitely take from this experience.
So, Kylie, we're coming now to the end of the interview, and I have to say there's been some fantastic tips in here. I'm going to give a quick rundown right at the very end in case people didn't quite catch those if you're driving or whatever. What's the number one thing you would say to any budding children's writer who is listening to this podcast, isn't quite comfortable yet with taking that big step? What would you say to them?
Do your research. Okay, so I give guidance now with few budding writers in my circle, and I'm very surprised when you ask, so what books have you read in your genre recently? And they say, none. Read them. Go and pick the books up off the shelf and read them. Look at the illustrations, look at the colour, look at the size, look at the font, look at the chapter lengths, look at the book length. There's your research right there.
Yeah, that's really good, important. And obviously, we have to have this question, whether or not you'll be able to answer it or not, I don't know. But what is your favourite mushroom?
Oh, man. It's going to happen because I haven't spotted it yet in the wild, and it is my absolute dream to, when they are in this part of the UK, is the fly agaric, or the toadstool, which is red with white spots on.
Yeah.
And that's just because it's so magical. I love everything about it. But you do have to be careful because it is poisonous and it can have hallucinations occur if you touch it. So don't touch one if you find one.
Fair enough. Now, before we wrap up with how people can get in touch with you, because obviously I'd love more people who are listening to this, if they have an affinity with wanting to write a book. Kylie is definitely a person to follow, or has a love for mushrooms. We're going to be giving your details out in a minute. But I just wanted to say, Thank you very much, first of all, for joining us today. And I know we're all really busy, but really appreciate the fact that you're able to take the time out of your busy writing / illustrating / social media support network to be able to talk to us. So I think from this interview, this is what I've gathered has been your sort of top tips. And do feel free if I have missed anything, is you found writing each week, you had a day set aside where you did your writing. You had accountability. So you would, obviously, you announced your plan to your social media groups. You sort of feel like you then had to continue with that journey. Definitely. And you had accountability. You had a plan. I mean, it wasn't particularly structured or really detailed, but you had a loose outline of where the story was going to go. And you looked at, most importantly, other books for the target audience that you were writing to. So you did your research and you knew who your target audience was. You got some encouragement when you're having slight off days of sharing snippets with your social media group or your family, which I think is such a great tip. I haven't thought of that, but absolutely, I think I'm definitely going to include that in my tips too for people who are writing. Get some social feedback, because I think when you get the encouragement, and also people then are invested in the book and your journey, so they're much more likely then to go and actually buy the book at the end. Reading it out, I think, is also a really good tip for people who are writing. How does the dialogue sound? And when you read it out, you can then spot your mistakes. One of my pet peeves with people who are first-time authors in their dialogue is they will often repeat the name of the character they're talking to in their conversation, when actually you don't need that, because when you're talking to someone, you don't always mention the other person's name when you're talking to them. And yet for some reason, when people write that in dialogue, it's what they do. It's really weird.
Oh, that's really interesting. It is, because I've noticed that I've done that a few times. I've went, hang on a minute, when I'm reading it out, I go, Inkcap. You wouldn't say that all the time.
No, you really wouldn't. You really wouldn't. So reading it out loud is fantastic, because it kind of gets rid of those inconsistencies. And I think dialogue especially really shows up where people are skilled at what they do, and dialogue is key. So that's a really good tip, reading it out. Don't do it alone is another one that you've said, and I totally agree. It's one of the reasons why I do coaching. Don't do it alone. It's really hard. And I think I'm going to repeat this one again, because you have mentioned it a couple of times, and that's do your research. And we said that very much so in the episode where we talked about the writing process and planning. So do your research. Is there anything I've missed, Kylie?
Just having the right people around you who are experts in the field. Like, I've been very, very lucky about meeting you two. Do you know what I mean? I've been really lucky, and I will shout this from the rooftops. And I know it's your podcast, but I don't care. I will shout it from the rooftops. Like,
well, thank you.
Hughes have been instrumental in helping us and making us realise I can actually do this. So it is important to have the right people there.
And now, lastly, and most importantly, how can people get in touch? How can they buy your book? Although in the show notes, we'll include the link as well. Where can people find you? Tell us about your social media groups, because I think you've got a couple on Facebook.
To come and join the magic in my community on Facebook, it is The Magical World of Mushroom Marvelous, which is a Facebook group. You can order the book via the website, which is www.magicalworldofmushroommarvelous.com. You can also buy me book in Waterstones. Which was a lifelong dream, just to have my name in Waterstones. So you can go to Waterstones, Google the book, and there it is. I also have an Instagram handle, which is at magical_world_mm. And the other group, which if you are interested in, is where I do all of my mentoring, the Northern Lass Lounge.
Excellent. This has been enlightening for sure.
Oh, yeah, and inspiring. I feel inspired to go and write a book now.
So Kylie, thank you for that. Really appreciate it. So for now, that's the end of series 1. I can't believe already we've finished this series. It's gone by so quick, and I hope you've really enjoyed it. I'm going to hand you over to Alexa 1, who's going to explain what's going to be up in series 2, which is going to be available from the 7th of September. So Alexa 1, what's coming up in series 2?
Well, having discussed all about how to get started writing your book, plan it, write it. In the next series, we're going to be talking about the technical side, so prepping your manuscript, ready for submitting it to an editing, the various types of editing and why they're important, why it's really vital not to skip those steps, and finding an editor who's right for you and shares a passion for your book.
So join us for 7th of September when series 2 will be out, and we look forward to seeing you. It sounds weird saying seeing you, but look forward to talking to you, sharing our expertise then. So it's bye-bye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.